Hey Josh, I've been talking to a close friend recently and they just opened up to me. They told me about how they're struggling with eating and body image. Like, I want to help them, but I don't really know what to say because I don't want to sound insensitive or do anything that is not helpful, maybe even hurtful. So, because it's just a realm that's very new to me. It's something that I haven't personally experienced. So I just don't know what to do.
Well, Tom, you're in luck because I just so happen to know a decent amount about eating disorders. Back in the day, I did this little advocacy slash research type project about eating disorders, and I'll be glad to share my knowledge with you.
Hmm. Please do tell. Do tell.
All right, okay, all right, okay. Better buckle up there, Tom, because I'm gonna take you on an adventure.
Oh, you already know I'm buckled up over here, Josh.
Looks like I managed to find my old Google Doc that I had all my research on. I don't know how I dug it up, but it's here. So, let's get started
Nice.
with some of the general statistics here. Let me tell you about it. Start off, roughly 10,200 people die from an eating disorder each year. And if you do the math, that comes out to be about 52 deaths every minute. The general trend is that as people get older, they're more likely to develop an eating disorder. There are a few reasons for that. The biggest reason is as someone gets older, they get more freedom, and they get to see more of the world. But with that freedom, they start becoming more self-conscious about themselves, how they look, and how they may appear to others. Eating disorders are also much more likely to occur in minority groups, whether it be people of different color, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or the disabled. Take the people with disabilities, for example. They have a much higher chance to experience an eating disorder. 20 to 30% of adults with an eating disorder are actually on some part of the autism spectrum. Asian Americans, just like you and me, apparently report much higher rates of restriction and purging compared to Caucasians. I mean, I can understand why, of course, being an Asian American myself, because, and having been to Asia many times in my life, the one thing that you rarely see are overweight, larger Asians. There's probably some scientific reason behind it. Maybe we have higher metabolism. I'm not sure what it is. But usually, like, thinner is the cultural norm back in Asia. And that ideology probably carries over here. So Asian Americans feel the pressure to follow that cultural norm. And gay and bisexual boys are also more likely to purge or take medications, such as laxatives or diet pills to keep their weight under control. This I do find quite interesting, because when people think of eating disorders, they usually picture super skinny females. But it is surprising me how many males actually struggle with it too. Of course, we don't hear about it much for the similar reason why we don't hear or see men cry or show emotion compared to women. It's because of the stigma. Man, I hate that word. How the socially accepted ideology is that men are supposed to be strong, and showing emotion is not being strong. Ironically, showing weakness and being open to improving that area, it requires great strength and great courage, as I learned from my theology class back in the day.
Whoa.
Some of those facts and stats were not what I was expecting. I will say that one about Asian Americans. Definitely 100% agree with you there. So, what are some of the causes for an eating disorder? How does one develop an eating disorder, Josh?
Well, Tom, one of the big reasons, as you would probably know, is social media, of course. People see the ideal person on social media and they want to be like them. Usually, these ideal people are on the thinner side. So then people become kind of hyper focused on their body, how they look to other people, and they want to be just like that ideal person. And they'll use healthy and or unhealthy ways to get there. Trauma is another reason. Say if they've had any abuse or certain just PTSD in general, those people are more likely to develop an eating disorder. Body dysmorphia plays a big role in eating disorders. It can develop with an eating disorder, or could be developed before an eating disorder. It's essentially when the mind tricks the body, into thinking that it's fat, overweight, when in reality it is either normal weight or underweight. And one last common reason is restricting the food that people intake gives them a sense of control. Maybe people who lack freedom, say with really strict parents, they may want to feel some freedom or some control over their lives. What can they control? What they put into their body. So that too can be a reason for eating disorder development.
That was quite informative indeed, Josh. My body's itching for a little bit of movement. What do you say we take this conversation downstairs?
Sounds good, Tom. You know, Tom, something that you might find odd that isn't talked about as much is athletes with eating disorders. I talked with a cross-country coach at my school. He said that most of the top runners in the world are skinny. So then the runners would get the notion that skinny makes you go faster. And so they'll deprive themselves of the necessary nutrition to fully recover after each day's workout. How the coach was able to spot this was through the hard exercises, because the runners could get through aerobic exercises, say short runs in the park, no problem. They catch the runners high and they just keep going. However, with the harder workouts, the runners who weren't able to finish it, coach would have a talk with them, see what's going on with them. Just because they didn't finish the hard exercises doesn't mean that they're going through an eating disorder. Could be from other stressors, say school or breakup or iron deficiency, which actually doesn't have much to do with diet from the start. But there is always the potential that could be from an eating disorder. When we think of athletes, we think of peak human fitness and peak human health. You probably wouldn't think that they would struggle with eating. But it's not uncommon for athletes to over-exercise and not give their bodies enough time to recover. You're right, Tom. I would have never thought that athletes would struggle with eating as well. The more you know. Anyways, I think we can call it a wrap here, right? Arms getting a little tired. Yeah, I would agree. We can call it a day here. Let's get head back up. Getting tired of me talking yet, Tom?
You're yapping a lot, I will say, but this is good stuff. I like this. Quite interesting. So what about certain types of eating disorders? What are some of those?
So there are 5 main types of eating disorders. The most common by far is anorexia nervosa. That's where people restrict the amount of food and fluids that they put in their bodies. There are reasons for that. Could be for punishment, could be they want to get thinner, lose weight, feel fat, body image. Anorexia actually has the highest mortality rate, not only out of any eating disorder, but out of any mental illness. Crazy. The next one is called bulimia nervosa, which is an eating disorder that's characterized by these uncontrolled periods of overeating, also known as binging, that are then followed by episodes of purging, either by vomiting or misuse of laxatives. The binging periods are when one eats beyond their fullness in a short period of time, so usually around 2 hours. And during that 2-hour period, they can't control themselves. It's uncontrolled. The next big one is called binge eating disorder, or BED. It's very similar to bulimia, where a person has episodes of uncontrolled eating, uncontrolled binging. But what separates BED from bulimia is that people who are bulimic will force the food out of their system when they consume it, whereas people with BED won't. For the most part, I have to add, because there's always exceptions. And then the last one is called ARFID, which stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. This is a new eating disorder, and from with this, they don't reach their nutritional needs. This is most prevalent in young kids to adolescents, or people with severe anxiety, essentially, because it's that anxiety that really plays a big role in ARFID, because sometimes they'll eat certain foods and then they'll either get nauseous, headache, feel sick from eating the food, and then they associate that food with pain, and so they avoid that food. So that usually, most of the time, people with ARFID, the food they eat are usually high in starches and low nutritional value. It's similar to anorexia nervosa, but not quite the same, because people with ARFID, their goal isn't to lose weight or get thin. They just don't want to feel the pain from eating certain foods.
Interesting. Alright, Tom, so you give me all this information. So what? Why does this matter?
I'm glad you asked, because I was getting a little carried away without mentioning the why this matters kind of question. So eating disorders are among one of the deadliest mental illnesses in the world. It affects over 9% of the world's population. 9% small number, but global scale, that's a lot of people. I talked with someone who works at a eating disorder recovery center. Her name, we'll call Miss Casey. And she talked about the medical issues that come along with eating disorders, which is something that's actually not talked about very much. So eating disorders can very well cause irreversible damage to the body. Say high blood sugar levels, heart problems, weak bones and muscles, skin problems, inflamed gums, stained teeth, maybe even loss of teeth. She has also experienced people whose bodies have forgotten how to digest food because they have deprived their body of that process. Like, it can get pretty extreme, and the list goes on and on. I'm no doctor, so I don't know everything, but those are just some of the medical complexities that come along with eating disorders.
All right. So, do you have any advice on how I could go about helping my friend? Or just not only my friend, but how I can maybe help with the growing issue of eating disorder?
Well, Tom, the number one thing I can tell you, do not try to fix them. Don't try to fix them. Nobody wants someone else to fix their problems. What you can do instead is just talk to them. Check up on them every so often. It doesn't have to be every day. It could be every other day, a few times a week, every other week. Just try to keep a connection between you and the person struggling. Have conversations with them. You don't always have to be, oh, how are you doing? How are you? How have you been? Kind of conversations. You can talk about, of course you can talk about that, but you can talk about anything from school to TV shows to games to books, the things you guys like. List goes on and on. It's just having those conversations make the other person feel like you care, because people who are struggling with mental illnesses and eating disorders, they feel isolated, they feel alone, especially people with eating disorders. They think, why can't I do a basic human activity? It's like eating, that's necessary for my survival. Also look out for some of the warning signs too. It can be hard to spot an eating disorder before someone's gotten dangerously skinny or gain a lot of weight, but you can look out for small comments such as whenever they make remarks, if they're counting calories a lot, if they're making comments about being fat, feeling fat, comments about their body, skipping out on changes in eating patterns. Simple, small, subtle things like that you may just push aside, especially in today's culture and society. Something that I would encourage you to do is tell a trusted adult who could get in contact and help the person struggling. However, you have to be careful when doing this, because more often than not, the person who's struggling does not want you to tell anyone about their issue. And you telling, say, their parents or a school counselor is like betraying to them it feels like you're betraying their trust that they had. So it's a hard decision to make, but it would be the right decision, because you can only do so much as a friend. You can't provide the same treatment as a dietitian or a therapist or a psychiatrist or a trained professional in that field. It's a tough, but at the same time you want to respect the person's privacy. It's a tough dilemma that even I struggle with. I talked with Miss Casey, and she mentioned how her recovery center is what they do at her recovery center. There are different levels of treatment for different levels of severity of the eating disorder, but most of them consist of very similar things: a dietitian, therapist, psychiatrist, and group therapy. Depending on the severity, someone may have to stay at the recovery center. If it's not too bad, if it's not that level, then someone may be able to go about their daily lives with school or work and then come to group therapy. All right, I think that's enough talking for today, Tom.
No, that's all right, Josh. Thank you, for enlightening me with your knowledge. I guess now we're even. I told you about the horrors of drone warfare, and now you tell me about the lesser known world of eating disorders. Much appreciated.
I'm always happy to share my knowledge with you. And yes, now we are even.
to myself, what a wonderful world. What a wonderful world.